Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Vice Chair Dort, you do have one motion that was adopted in camera that you can disclose now in public.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we have one motion adopted in camera. The following motions were adopted in camera. Whereas the School Board Collective Bargaining Act, the Act designates the Ontario Catholic School Trustee Association, OCSTA, as the employer bargaining agency for every English language separate district school board with respect to all bargaining units for central bargaining with OECTA. Whereas it is expected that a central table for principals and vice principals will be again created in order to discuss the renewal / amendment of central terms and conditions of employment for principals and vice principals. Whereas the Act does not contain any guidance with regard to the designation of an employer bargaining agency for a central table for principals and vice principals. Therefore, be it resolved that where a central table is established to discuss terms and conditions of employment for principals and vice principals, the Halton Catholic District School Board hereby authorizes OCSTA to act as an employer bargaining agent on its behalf for such central discussions. OCSTA may exercise its role as employer bargaining agent in respect of the principal and vice principal group, Catholic Principals Council of Ontario, consistent with the obligations and duties created under the School Board's Collective Bargaining Act for support staff unionized employees, and resolved that the Halton Catholic District School Board ratified the attached memorandum of settlement between the board and the Association of Professional Service Personnel, APSSP, to be effective September 1st, 2019, and to expire August 31, 2022. Mr. Chair.
Well, I went ahead. We need to finish with the opening exercise. So, Student Trustee Swan, can you please continue with the opening exercise?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I believe we sing O Canada right now. So can you please rise for the singing of O Canada? I affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada, her heirs and successors, and I will faithfully observe the laws of Canada and fulfill my duties as a Canadian citizen.
Agenda item 1.3, we didn't get to that, so we'll deal with that afterwards. Approval of the agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to the agenda? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by?
Helena Carabella.
Trustee Carabella, seconded by
Duart.
Trustee Duart. Trustee Murphy?
Sorry?
In favor?
In favor, yes, sorry.
Thank you. Trustee Agnew?
In favor?
Trustee Guzzo?
In favor?
Trustee Duart?
In favor.
Trustee Carabella?
In favor.
Trustee O'Brien?
In favor.
Trustee DeRosa's gone away for a moment. All right, motion passes. Are there any declarations of conflict this evening? Seeing none, I will move on to agenda item 4, action items 4.1, school year calendar. I will read the motion and resolve that the Halton Catholic District School Board approve the revised 2020-2021 school year calendar. Can I have a mover, please?
I move it.
Moved by Trustee O'Brien, seconded by
Duart.
Trustee Duart. Superintendent Crow, can you please provide the board with the ministry mandated changes to the February pre-approved calendar?
Certainly, and through you, Mr. Chair, good evening, everyone. Just want to provide you an update on our school year calendar. As you recall, you approved the original school year calendar on March 31st, which was then submitted to the ministry for final approval. We reached out to them on May 21st to inquire about the status of our calendar, and at that time they advised that they were not approving any calendars for any boards and that more information would be coming. Last Tuesday, so on June 30th, we received a memo from the ministry with revised parameters for the 2020-2021 school year calendar with the required resubmission date of July 10th. So the additional parameters were that the ministry is advising that school boards should set 3 professional activity days prior to the start of student instruction. We again have worked with our coterminous board to ensure that we have integration of transportation with them. And we also made the decision as a calendar committee, and I'd like to thank the various members of the calendar committee that met under sort of very short notice to work on this. It was a real great partnership and appreciate it very much. Because we're still working on our learning models for the upcoming school year, we have currently removed our examination days from the calendar. This gives us more flexibility as to be able to schedule the exams when they will actually fall once we get more information about return to school from the ministry. So at this point, well, happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Trustee Agnew, you have the floor.
Great, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, just a question to Superintendent Crowell. Can I just ask who is on the calendar committee?
Sure, it's actually in the report. So we have members of...
Sorry, I have bad Wi-Fi up here, so I can't access things timely. Sorry, Superintendent.
That's okay. So we have a member from CPIC. We have our elected union presidents. We have the chair of the board, our local QP 3166 and 5200 representatives. We have a principals association representative that make up the committee.
Follow-up, Trustee Agnew? No follow-up?
Thank you.
Okay. Trustee Guzzo, you now have the floor.
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. So, Superintendent Crowell, you mentioned, and I saw some of the correspondence that said that we were told that they were not approving our calendars at the time. That was in May. I thought it was in the end of April that came back. Can I ask why that wasn't shared with us sooner?
I mean, I sent an email to the education officer that I spoke with, and he just said that more information would be coming. We were sort of with the understanding that the ministry had other things to focus on. So we were sort of waiting to hear. We expected that it would be approved. They hadn't given us any reason that it wouldn't be approved. It was just that they were still waiting to make final decisions.
Sorry, follow-up, Trustee Guzzo?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. However, we had a wholesome discussion in regards to the school calendar back at the end of March. Given that it still hadn't been approved and that we quite quickly approved it, as you recall, because you wanted to make the deadline, I just don't understand why we weren't notified that was the case and that you had that communication. I would just have expected that when we do something and we pass it, that communication come back to us as board members so that we know what's going on, and that didn't happen. So that's very disappointing.
Okay, and fair enough. Like I said, we didn't have any indication that it wouldn't be approved. It was just that the decision was being held off. So I understand what you're saying, but like I said, I think it's certainly we were given no indications that it wasn't going to be passed, or that would be information we would have shared with you.
Thank you. Follow up, Trustee Guzzo?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Carabella, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask about, I checked the dates and the PA days, so I'm thinking that one of them was taken away and put in at the beginning, and I think it's the Faith Day, the one around Thanksgiving, which is really special to our board, and I'm wondering about making that decision. Is that who made that decision, and perhaps another one of the PA days, not the math one, but
Sure.
Another one could have been used and we wouldn't lose our Faith Day.
Sure. The reason that we removed the October 6th PD day was because it was the one that we had the most flexibility on moving. A lot of them are tied to our reporting schedule, so there's very few that we can actually remove. Our concern with the Faith Day on October 6th would be that if we kept that date, we're not sure that we could actually do a Faith Day. We'd be bringing people together physically. If you look in the report, there are some PA days that are still to be determined. We're expecting more direction from the ministry around what those PA days will look like. We have until July 24th to submit that, and we're expecting more information will come before then. And we're also hopeful that we'll get some news that would allow us to have a Faith Day as a board later in the year when we can celebrate as school communities and as a Catholic Education Center community.
Okay,
Trustee Carabella, do you have a follow-up?
No, thank you for that. That makes sense. I didn't think of us not being able to gather. Yeah, so many changes. Thank
Agreed.
you.
Are there any other questions? If there are no other questions, I will take it to a vote. It was moved by Trustee O'Brien, seconded by Trustee Dort. Trustee DeRosa is absent. Trustee O'Brien?
In favor.
Trustee Carabella?
In favor.
Trustee Dort?
In favor.
Trustee Guzzo?
In favor.
Trustee Agnew?
In favor.
Trustee Murphy?
In favor.
I'm also in favor. Trustee Caratal?
In favor.
Trustee Swan?
In favor.
Trustee Bambra?
In favor.
Thank you. Motion passes. Moving on to agenda item number 5, information reports. 5.1, release of the 2020-2021 grants for student needs, known as the GSN, and revenue update. Superintendent Lofts, can you please lead the discussion or provide us some background on this matter?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. Is that better? Attached is the report relating to the 2020-2021 GSN, as well as the expected impact of the GSN revenue. Adam Cross, our Senior Manager of Finance, and I have prepared a presentation to help with this. I'm going to attempt right now to share my screen with everyone.
You are, yourself.
Yeah. Okay. So just looking over quickly the agenda for today, we're going to look at the enrollment, revenues, PFFs or partnerships with the ministry and funding, announcements for HCDSB, support for student funds, program enhancements, new initiatives, and next steps. So looking at our estimate for enrollment, You can see in front of you there we have our graph of our average daily enrollment over the last several years, and we are still expecting another increase in the fall of about 1.9% of over the current revised estimates that we talked to back in December. Now, if everyone remembers, the biggest driver to our revenue is enrollment. Enrollment is what basically drives all of our GSN revenue, or a majority of our GSN revenue. Not all of it, but the majority of it. Now, what this graph here shows us is the lighter side, or the more faded side, is where we were at revised estimates for all the different grade levels. So you can see there, the light blue is the revised estimates for JK, SK. The dark blue would be the estimates for the upcoming year for 2020 and 2021. And you can see there that we've done it for all the different groups. So we have the JKSK, grade 1 to grade 3, 4 to 8, and 9 to 12. Now again, like I mentioned earlier, we are expecting a 1.9% increase over our current estimates for the upcoming, or this current year, 1920. So what we did this year is something a little different. We looked at the GSNs, and we basically, I'm going to say we froze, we locked in the biggest driver being enrollment. Try to see the actual impact that the GSNs have, or the change year over year, with the constant factor being enrollment. So we didn't change our enrollment initially, and then we looked at the change to the GSN, how much revenue we're receiving. So this first page here, we're going to look at some negative impacts. We have this year the online learning. So what's the online learning? It came out this year in the GSNs that students entering grade 9 are to complete 2 online classes before graduation. Now I believe these are at a ratio of 30 to 1, so the online class will be at a ratio of 30 students per 1 teacher. As a result, the ministry has done a calculation where it deems that that should impact our board by about $90,000 this year. The second negative impact on GSNs, again, we froze the enrollment, so we're just looking at pure change year over year, is long-term debt interest reduction. And this makes sense given that each year we're paying more and more of our principal, just like on your home mortgage. Each year, the amount of interest you pay, the amount of principal you pay, the principal goes up, the interest you pay goes down. Same idea with our long-term debt. Short-term borrowing on capital. So we haven't calculated this out yet. We're still working on this one. So right now we have it currently at 0, but we're looking at it last year, just as a point of reference, we had $210,000. So currently, that's why it's obviously impacting us by $210,000, because we haven't updated it yet for this year. Principal and vice principal compensation agreement. So it expired in 1920. As we talked earlier, we're looking at the upcoming year negotiations for principals and vice principals for the upcoming year. So until we receive a confirmation of an agreement, we don't have the funding. So the ministry has frozen us to where we were at the previous year. So that $260,000 will not be coming through this year. Having said that, if a negotiation or agreement is made, the ministry will adjust accordingly. And finally, the big one on this page anyway, is the elimination of the attrition protection funding. So what's the attrition protection funding? We all recall last year, the ministry, initially in our GSNs, we were funding, or the funding was, the ratio for secondary class size was at 28 to 1. So what the ministry did, so that no teachers would become redundant or would lose their position, they offered something called the attrition protection funding mechanism, which basically allowed boards to receive funding to offset the GSN funding mechanism for the pupil priority grant or pupil foundation grant. So last year we were funded at 28 to 1 in the pupil foundation grant. Ministry went in and said, no, we're going to use it. We don't have teachers, we have attrition protection. Attrition protection being that the only time you would replace a teacher, or when teachers were to retire or to leave the board, you wouldn't replace them. That's how they were trying to get your average daily enrollment, or your ratio in your classroom up to 28 to 1. This year, as we know, we have a collective agreement in place of 23 to 1. So our GSNs now will see a big influx in revenue relating to the pupil foundation grant A large part of that is related to the fact that we are now at 23-1 versus the funding mechanism last year of 28-1. Another part of this is the 1% increase and the ELA or the benefit increase that the groups have received as well. So this next page that I just fast forwarded to, these are all the positive impacts on our revenue for the upcoming year. Again, we froze the enrollment on just to compare apples to apples. Is that hard to see, guys? Is that better? Sorry. Thanks. So you can see that $14 million, it looks like a big influx, and it is a big influx, but you have to offset that against the attrition protection funding of about $12.3 million that we're no longer receiving this year. So again, the reason that we have that big influx primarily relates to the class size going from 28-1 in the GSM Foundation to 23-1, as well as the collective agreements that have settled in the past year. Supports for student funds. This was also part of the recent agreements. For our board, we're expecting to receive about $3.3 million. So these are for various positions, again, to support students. Supply teachers. This is both for, what the ministry did for the supply teachers was, the ministry realized that boards, there was a deficit in what the cost of supply days were to us versus what we were funding. So essentially for this year, and I assume going forward, because it's part of the GSN, the ministry has essentially provided us an extra day funding relating to our supply teachers and our supply ECEs. So that was about $615,000 in impact. Teacher and early educator qualifications and education grant. What this is essentially, I will explain this one. I will explain this by saying that if we looked at a teachers, we're funded in the Pupil Foundation grant of an average salary for a teacher. So let's hypothetically say it's $75,000. So the ministry will provide us funding for our teachers at an average of, let's say, $75,000. We will then go in and analyze all our teaching group, and we will look at where they fall based on their qualifications and their experience, and then the ministry will make up that difference. So, for example, if we have teachers, a number of our teachers that have been working with us for the 12 years, at the top of the, for lack of a better term, the top of the grid, we will be funded as part of that grant for the extra $25,000 or so to get us to the top of the grid for the teachers. Conversely, if we have a number of teachers that are newer teachers that are below that $75,000, we will also be reduced by that amount of our teachers that were going from the 75 to whatever their salary being at 60,000 or 63,000, whatever a teacher or a newer teacher or a less experienced teacher would receive. So that again is, we are not either punished nor do we gain with the experience level of our teachers. We are funded for the experience level of our teachers, whether they're a new teacher or a more experienced teacher. Temporary accommodation, this was a good one for our board. As we know, we have a number of portable leases. We're receiving an additional $520,000 this year relating to portable leases as for temporary accommodation. Special education, this has changed as well. Again, just to remind everybody, I haven't changed in this example here, I have not changed our enrollment. So this is using last year's enrollment. We have about 540,000 for SEPA, the benchmark, and the DESNA benchmark, or change, sorry, was about 710,000. So quite significant. Additional software licensing. So what this was the ministry provided a number of apps and programs and software centrally for the province. As those licenses come up for renewal, we are now to purchase those licenses directly at the board level. So the ministry has provided a compensation mechanism of, for our case, it's $30,000 or so for the upcoming year to help offset the cost of us being required now to purchase those software items. School operations and such, there's $460,000, roughly a 2% increase for the maintenance of our schools the ministry has provided, and that's primarily for your utilities and things like that. School renewal and school condition improvement, so this is the capital type work for our schools to make sure our schools are maintained at the high quality that we're fortunate to have at our board. So we've received an additional $410,000 between the school renewal and the school condition improvement grant. Both those grants are used for capital improvements. So by that I mean things like the HVAC and roofs and things like that. The ministry has also transferred a number of PPFs. So again, the priorities and partnership grants to the GSN. So this is actually a good thing. It gives us better ability to forecast, to plan. It's now part of the GSNs on a yearly basis, whereas before we would have to receive contracts, transfer payment agreements, sign off transfer payment agreements. You didn't know from year to year if you're going to receive those funds or not. So that's actually a good thing for our board, and there's about $600,000 that we are now receiving as part of the GSN that were formerly part of the PPFs. Just for example, the four were the executive compensation, $35,000, curriculum assessment, $53,000, mental health, $352,000, and experiential learning of $159,000. So now part of the GSN. And then I would have in there various, various increases in different levels of the grant and such, which total about $805,000. So looking at this, the net impact is about $14 million, again, year over year, not changing our enrollment numbers. Now, this dark blue item here, the $6.475 million or $6,475,000, that is the impact of growth. So when I then go in, update the EFS document, the Excel document for our expected growth for the upcoming year, that increases us by another $6.5 million roughly or so. So then if you look now, where we are year over year is about $20.6 million more than we would have been last year. I should remind everyone that a large part of those funds were already earmarked for positions, and when I say positions, they were part of the student success funds and such. So it's not like it's an additional $20.5 million that we have to go out and spend and such. Unfortunately, no, that's not the case. A lot of these are already earmarked for ongoing needs of the board that have already been negotiated and whatnot. But I thought hopefully this was an easier way to understand the impact of enrollment by comparing, freezing essentially your ADE or your enrollment. We're able to see where those changes are, both on a positive and negative, and then going back in, updating enrollment, and seeing what the impact of growth is. So hopefully that's maybe an easier way to understand how our revenues work. Is there any questions or comments?
So I'll open it up to a question. Trustee DeRosa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Superintendent Law. Just to help me put things into perspective, our revenue stream, the major revenue stream, is about $300 million. Is that correct? 295.
No, it's our revenue stream. What we're entitled to as part of the GSNs is pushing $400 million.
Okay.
What you're thinking is what we receive. What I believe you're seeing, Trustee DeRosa, is how much we receive directly from the ministry. What you're missing from that, though, is what our tax revenue is.
All right.
So also municipal taxes of about.
All right. So let's use 300, 400, whatever the number is. I was looking at the first line. I just want to establish that this is an increase of roughly between 5 and 7% over last year. Roughly. Okay.
We're about 5.5% more in our operating revenue.
Right. Now, the other thing I'd like to establish is, do we have anywhere in here, and it doesn't seem to me that we do, that the government is allotted for the extraordinary circumstances of having to adjust to COVID? Or is that coming to us from a different line?
Yeah, I was going to get to that actually, but we can address it now. The ministry has also set aside about $25 million, 15 for technology and such, and about 10 for mental health issues. So if you do, we're roughly 1.6% of the province's allotment in education. So if you take 1.6 of that, that's about $400,000 between those. We've heard that the ministry, they have, I guess to answer your first question, have we received the allocation yet? No, we have not. Ministry has said from some discussion that they could be part of the GSN, or they may also be part of another PPF that comes at a later date. Supplementary. So that's...
May I have a follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Trustee DeRosa, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, $400,000 seems like, honestly, a pittance in comparison to the challenges we have to deal with in terms of trying to get back to some degree of normality in September. That'll be a drop in the bucket, I would think. What's your view of that? And is there any other opportunity to, I don't know, go get more or make arguments for additional funds as a result of COVID?
To you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
What we're doing, Trustee DeRosa, is we're actually looking at right now to prepare for the fall as much as we can in the summer using the current budget. So we are looking at that as well. We're trying to see what our potential surplus is, or savings is as a result of COVID, and trying to make strategic purchases during the summer to prepare us for the fall. It's difficult right now as we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what it's going to look like. So there's a number of different scenarios that we're trying to discuss in the senior team, but unfortunately, we don't know yet. I believe August 4th is really a day that's coming up that will get some more information on that.
I have a question. Are you finished, Trustee DeRosa? You had your supplementary?
Just one other thought I want to share with my colleagues and the staff is that certainly this COVID situation in time for September, if one were to be if I was a betting man, I would bet that we probably are not going back to what we all knew. It has to be some variation of that. So, and again, I'm speculating and I'm guessing, and so I think we're probably looking at going back with some hybrid of distant learning and physical presence. And that's still, obviously, for all the good reasons in the world, unclear. I would guess that in order to confront the September situation in the next couple of months, $400,000 is far from being enough to deal with that challenge that's facing us. And that's a comment that's not really just some food for thought. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Superintendent Law.
So before I move on to Trustee O'Brien, I do have a question. The new date for the supplementary that the ministry is going to be issuing the supplementary amount, do we know when that is? No, it hasn't been out. Okay. So there is a supplementary forthcoming. We just don't know what the date is. And that's where the government revises their budget estimates as we revise ours. Trustee O'Brien, you have the floor.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Superintendent Lofts. I see that in the technical paper attached, it mentions an Indigenous grant allocation. Is that based on the total number of Indigenous students in our board?
Through you, Superintendent Darren.
There is that portion in there, and we have that. The Indigenous, there's, I believe it's section 18 in the EFIS document. It's also with the number of classes that are being taught, Indigenous studies as well. Trustee O'Brien.
Do you have a supplementary, Trustee O'Brien?
I do. So
Thank you.
through you, Mr. Chair, to Superintendent Lofts or Director Daly, to determine how many Indigenous students we have, is that strictly done through self-identification?
Secretary Daly, go ahead.
Yeah, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that's how we determine our Indigenous student population.
Thank you.
Are there, Trustee DeRosa, I believe you have the floor again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, your comment jotted another question in my mind, or an idea in my mind, is that if there is a supplementary or an intended supplementary funding that's forthcoming, is it at all possible for us to estimate or get an idea, a very high-level idea of what the COVID is going to mean for us, and maybe anticipate that number accordingly? Is there any way we can get a handle on what this thing is going to cost us at the end of the day? It would be useful only from the perspective that you know, if we think it's going to cost us, I'll just throw out a number, $50 million and the government comes to us with 10, then we have an argument to make. Is that something we would contemplate? That's all.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I guess, Trustee DeRosa, I think we can only work with the information that's available right now. So when we're doing a plan, we can only look at what we know at this point in time. We do have the opportunity of revised estimates in December to look at it again where more information becomes available to us. But I think when we're looking at this budget, we can only work with what we know at this point in time. We are fortunate that we come back in December to kind of look at it again, but at this point in time, we look at what we have right now. I would also like to remind the trustees that we do have a reserve in place as well to assist us if we ever did get into that situation where we need to look at COVID or COVID changes quite rapidly. We do have flexibility there as well. But how we're looking at it right now is just the information that we have available at this point in time.
Do you have a follow-up, Trustee DeRosa?
No, I'm quite satisfied with that. Thank you, Superintendent Loft, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If there are no other questions, then I would need a
question. Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Trustee O'Brien, you have the floor.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair, to Superintendent Loss. It says in your report that, in addition, as a result of the school closures announcements until the end of the school year, the transportation grant is reduced by $24.8 million across the province, which is based on the estimated fuel portion of the transportation contracts in the grants for the ends of May and June. How does that affect us? Do we lose out on that because of that as well?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
We do. Having said that, we also have reduced the amount that we are being charged by our consortium partners, our busing partners, where we've reduced the amount that we pay them as well by roughly the same. So the net effect should theoretically be nothing to report.
You have a supplementary, Trustee O'Brien?
No, thank you very much.
Vice Chair Dort, you have the floor.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like Rosie to put up page 125 of the technical papers, which is this part of this package. Page 125 and page 126. It deals with trustee honoraria, and for the information of all the trustees, Rosie, is that an easy task? Page 125 and page 126.
Sure. Okay.
And while Rosie is doing that, Mr. Chair, question to Superintendent Loft. The trustee honoraria part of it, is there any change? I looked at the technical paper, there seems to be some change in that. Have we studied the change involved and the calculation of trustee honoraria? There is an amount here, there's a table on page 125 of the technical paper 2020-21. Spring 2020, which says that the base amount is 5,900, which is the same, plus attendance amount of 1,200. That assumes attendance at 2 committee meetings of the board per month, which are required under the Education Act. So the way I'm reading it and the way I'm interpreting it, every trustee must attend 2 committee meetings per month. So have we studied this part of it? How have we got to this, or are we yet to get to that, Mr. Chair?
Superintendent Lofts, can you please address that question?
Well, certainly through Mr. Chair, I was actually trying to multitask there. I'm going to miss the first part of the question, but
do you want to repeat your first question, Trustee Dort?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So the trustee honoraria, this seems to be in the technical papers presented. There seems to me to be a difference between what it used to be, the calculation of the honoraria, and the requirements now. So my question was, have we got to the analysis of the way the trustee honoraria is being calculated? Because the table provided on page 125, the way I read it tells me it's something different. So I'm just wondering whether we have reached this section and analyzed it.
Superintendent Lofts, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'll remind through Mr. Chair, we follow our policy with respect to trustee allocation, trustee honoraria. So whatever our policy says is what we follow as a board. Having said that, we're mixing up terms, I think, here. This is how we're funded as a board. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's how things are paid out as a board. We follow the policy that's set in place right now, and that's what we go by. Now, I should mention here, too, now I can pull it up here, how everything's calculated annually. I just need a second here, because I think there's another part to this where our revenue that we receive is about 160,000 or so, again, I'm going with memory right now, for all trustee related expenditures as a board. So we receive about $160,000. Our actual expense is higher than that. So what that doesn't include in there is all the mileage, your conferences, technology, thank you, your cell phones, things like that. So that also comes out of that. It's not just a simple, that's your one allocation and that's it. There's a lot of other expenditures that we have as a board that comes out of that allocation.
Sorry, Mr. Point of privilege, can we get the appropriate document up? I don't believe this is what trustee...
That's not the one. That's not the document.
It's referencing. Before we continue, can we get the what he's referencing up, please?
Point of privilege granted, page 125. That's 126, is it not?
No,
Page,
it's the wrong document.
no,
That's
this,
the wrong document. Okay.
yeah, it's the wrong document. I'm looking at the eScribe package.
Yeah, if we could just get that done before we continue.
Rosie, it's page 278 of the package.
Yeah. So trustees, if you do have a question, put it in the chat. That way it gives us advance notice so that we can get it on the screen for you.
Yes, we are in the correct spot. If you go further down, Rosie, to the table at the bottom, yeah, stop there. So it says here in the first column of the amount, it says attendance amount 1,200. That assumes attendance at 2 committee meetings of the board per month, which are required under the Education Act. So the way I'm reading it in the technical paper, which is given below, is this a change? Does it say that trustees must attend 2 committee meetings per month and they should be paid 1,200? That was my question.
Good.
Yep, sure. Through you, Mr. Chair. No, Trustee, now I think I understand a little bit better. Trustee Dort, no, it's not a change at all in the, there's no change here. This is how it's been for a
From the
number of years
beginning.
now.
Yeah, since 2012.
So to clarify, Mr. Chair, trustees must attend 2 committee meetings per month. Is it correct? Am I correct?
Well, it all depends on the board and how that you run your committees.
Through you, Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
I
go
would
ahead.
suggest, because that's how we're funded, Trustee Duarte. So they're giving the example of, they're assuming that a regular trustee would attend those 2 board meetings per month required under the Act. The ones required under the Act are things like SAL meetings, CPIC. So that's how they determine the allocation that we get as a board.
That's what you can bill.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so there is no change in this section as far as I'm concerned.
No.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have a supplementary, Trustee?
No, I just wanted a clarification of any change to this section.
So you have a related question? Go ahead.
Actually, this was a question. One more thing that came to my mind is if you go further down, Rosie, to the next page, there is a calculation of, go a little further down, Rosie. Yeah, that's the paragraph here. The ministry funds this. Are we still following this, the pre-2006, the ministry funding for trustee honoraria is calculated as below. Pre-2006 at 100% plus the difference between 2006 and now. Is this the same thing as before or is there a change?
Change. Go ahead, Superintendent Lofts.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's the same thing, Trustee Dort.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, Trustee Guzzo, you had an associated question to what Trustee Dort asked?
I was just trying to clarify that if that's in fact what the Education Act says, We're required to be in compliance, are we not? Like, we don't get to make a policy that's contrary to the Education Act.
That would be correct.
I don't think our policy is reflective that it says that we must, can you go back up, Rosie? Sorry, I apologize. To where it says, that assumes that, oh no, you're going too far. Up there, right there, good. That assumes attendance at 2 committees of the board per month, which are required under the Education Act. So that should be reflected in our policy if that's in the Education Act.
Superintendent Lofts, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The requirement is to attend the committee meetings. To be paid for it is not a requirement. That's how we're funded. There's a funding mechanism to it, but it's not necessarily a requirement to be paid for it. And I think that's the approach to the prior we've had in our policy.
How about we review it and get back on this particular topics, because I think we're going all over the place, and we need to look at the legislation and marry it with this summary document that we have in front of us. Trustee Guzzo, do you have a follow-up to that?
No, I just...
No, it's a good point. Thank you. So you don't have a follow-up?
No, I'm listening. It's a lot to absorb. 336 pages in a very short period of time.
Yes. Trustee Carabella, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with Trustee Guzzo. A lot of pages in a few days. So I'd like to know what's the next steps for this. Aaron, do you come back with the budget all put together, and then we're going to put the new initiatives that we had before, or has this new budget affected the new initiatives? Are there going to be new ones? That's what I'm wondering. What the next.
So I think Secretary Daly wishes to address that. Is that okay with you, Trustee Carabella?
Certainly. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just Secretary Daly, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. We're on page 9 of Aaron's presentation. So we took a break to answer questions so far. So in terms of the rest of the presentation and the go forward, that's what we'll get to momentarily if we can move off of page 9.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Trustee Carabella. So go ahead, Superintendent Lofts.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I just want to continue on with the presentation.
Yeah, so trustees, can we hold the questions, and perhaps we can get further on in the presentation, and then we'll have more specific questions to ask Superintendent Lofts?
I concur.
Okay, so Superintendent Lofts, go ahead.
Mr. Chair. I'm just going to put it back up on the screen here. Okay, I think it's up. And just regarding, the length of the report, everyone, I just want to address that too. I put that in more for information purposes. Maybe going to go forward, I won't include that. Those are all just things that everyone has access to online. So I just gave it to everybody, but going forward, maybe I won't. I really wanted to focus on the report itself. So if there was some confusion with that, I apologize. I did not intend that at all. So looking here, and I know Trustee DeRosa already mentioned this, kind of stole my thunder a little bit, but he was correct. We actually had growth in our revenue of about 5.5% this year. So you can see that at our revised estimates, we had about 373,000 in our 373 million in our operating revenue, and this year we're forecasting about 394, growth of about 20.6 million. So we talked earlier about the priorities and partnership funding. So we have received some of our announcements now. In the report, you might notice where I mentioned that we received some, and then I did some estimates for others. What those estimates were is kind of similar to how I talked about earlier about the 25 million or so that we haven't received our allocation for yet. I just basically took the provincial allocation and multiplied that by 1.6%, or roughly how much we represent of the total Ministry of Education budget in education. So there's really no fancy formula for that. It's just an estimate that we have until I get additional information. Now what we do have are these PPFs that are in front of us right here. So these are the ones that we have had announced to us already and were included when the ministry announced back on June 19th, the GSN and all the corresponding documentation. So you can see here that a large part of these are similar to what we received last year. We have a couple of newer ones at the top, after-school skill development programs, as well as educators' autism AQ subsidy. But everything else is pretty much the same as what it was last year.
Except for the math.
Sorry,
The math?
the math, yeah, it's the same dollar amount as we had received last year. Yes. So,
Thank you.
Chair Antomasi had asked about the math allocation, and it is the same. We've received it already, and it's the same allocation we received the prior year. So support for student funds. You might have heard, we were talking a little bit about that earlier, 3.3 million or so that we're receiving, and we're estimated to receive. This chart here explains the position and the allocation of the positions that came out of the collective agreements as well as additional agreements with the ministry. There's a RECTA, elementary and secondary, and I tried to break it down by dollar amount as well as estimated positions that are being filled with that funding. Same with the QB, the EAs as well, APS that we talked about, as well as we've received some funding for non-union as well. So we're receiving additional funding for non-union. So program enhancements, I know we talked about this a little bit before, and I guess the question came up, I believe Trustee Carabella mentioned it about the program enhancements and new initiatives and such. So what I thought I would do here is I'd bring them back here so everyone can see them again. I can send this out after. We won't necessarily discuss them now, but I thought it was important to bring it back forward. I know we talked about it back in April, towards the end of April, but I thought we can take a look at it again now. We have changed from where we were back in April with additional information. So this first slide here, these are 2020-2021 costs associated with board-approved program enhancements. So we have the feminine hygiene dispensers in our washrooms. We have the optional French programming, the expansion of our French programming, as well as we have the advanced placement, the AP program at Christ the King in Georgetown. So those are all things that we've added to the list here, but we've already kind of discussed that in this past over the past year. So this is the programs, just so everyone's aware that we have put them in and they're attached to the budget. Additional program enhancements. So this is ones we looked at before, back in April, but I'm bringing them forward again. They've changed the list a little bit. We have electronic filing project. Indigenous education certification courses for teachers, as well as Indigenous integrated arts and religious training. Those are in the curriculum department. Full day kindergarten equipment replenishment. What's that? Well, everyone knows we have full day kindergarten now in our classroom, and we were initially provided with funding to equip our classrooms as well as remodel our classrooms to be ready for full day kindergarten. Well, as we all know, full day kindergarten's been around for a number of years now, and we're going to start needing to replace and replenish some of our equipment. So we've put in a budgetary line item there to provide our elementary schools at least some form of funding to start looking at replenishing that equipment. Reporting and analyst, this is a position, it's in the IT area. Due to the required reporting, expanded internal and external reporting requirement, what this position would be for would be to basically mine our IT systems. So data mine, get our reports ready, so we're able to have fluid reporting, both internal and external, to our system. So it's a reporting analyst position, so they would assist with finance, they would assist with SFIS, wherever we have a need in the system for reporting. Financial analyst, reporting to the manager of budget and capital. This is a required position as well, especially with the amount of reporting and expectation that's being placed on the finance department. Additional analyst is required in that area. A planning officer to assist with enrollment and planning requirements in the planning department. Library technician. This is an interesting one and a very needed one. This position, even though it reports to IT, the library technician to keep the inventory, track of all our IT equipment. So we are, not that we don't know where it is now, or we do know where it is now, but it's just, we're going to try to implement that or integrate that into the, there's a system that the library technicians use to track all their books and such. We want to integrate that into, to get all our IT, whether it be chargers or cords or things like that. Make sure that we can track all of our IT equipment. And the last position here is, this really isn't a new position at all, it's really more a change in funding. This position formerly was funded under the IRCC, the consultant for the multiculturalism and newcomers. That's under curriculum. There's a person in this role, has been in that role for a number of years, but the funding mechanism has changed. So I thought we'd bring it forward to trustees so that they see that this position Even though it's not new, it's just a change in funding. And new initiatives for this upcoming year. The only one we have on there for our new initiative is the estimated impact of the ongoing non-union job evaluation. That was at $200,000 that we spoke of before. So next steps. So right now we're proposing July 22nd to bring a budget estimate draft, a draft budget. We'll bring it forward, look at it, discuss it, and then hopefully bring it back for July 29th to get the final budget presented to the trustees for approval. The budget's actually not due to the ministry till August 19th, but we would prefer if we could, and we're doing our best to get it done by the end of July, so that everyone can have a well-deserved break in August. Now, going back to the plan, I know, and I guess, again, Trustee Carabello mentioned this before. So when we bring the draft forward, we're going to be including all the teacher positions that are required for growth. We're going to include all the support for students, about $3.3 million, all those positions that are coming from that. We're also going to include all the required adjustments for utility increases and things like that. What we're hoping to get discussion from and approval from are all the items that we listed tonight. So all the program enhancements and new initiatives. We will be putting in the first section, the ones that are already board approved. We'll be putting those in already. It's more the last page or so, last 2 pages that we'll be bringing back. So that's the plan, everyone. I'm up for any kind of discussion on that.
So I have a queue waiting for you with all kinds of questions. So Trustee DeRosa, you have the floor first. Trustee DeRosa, are you with us?
I am with you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you
very much. Through you. My question was really in relation to a thought I had on the prior discussion regarding trustee honoraria. But it's a larger question for Superintendent Loft. Is it possible, Superintendent Loft, to roll up all of the costs related to the Board of Trustees in 1 year? Now, I understand that they may be spread all over the chart of accounts, but it would really be useful, at least for myself, and I believe probably some other trustees around the table, to see if we can talk in terms of a total budget for trustees, be it legal, be it administration costs, be it whatever. It would be quite appropriate to see whether we can see what that total roll-up is. I have no idea, honestly, whether we cost the board, $10,000 a month or $150,000 a month. It would be useful to understand that. How much do we spend in legal fees in total? How much do we exhaust in terms of staff support? And I know this will never be a science, but in cases where we can identify the numbers directly, I think it would be useful to roll up those numbers and probably even account them separately in the chart of accounts. So I throw that out to you for consideration.
Trustee DeRosa, just bear with me. So a specific question. You want a report that states exactly what?
Exactly what the Board of Trustees costs the board.
Okay, so you want all the categories. Is that what you're asking?
If possible, yes.
All right, thank you. So, did you get that, Superintendent Lofts?
Sure. We've actually brought that information before, and back in actually our last meeting, it was included with that report as well. But all
right. Do you have a supplementary, Trustee DeRosa?
No, I do not. I'm actually quite satisfied with this my question being addressed. Okay.
Thank you. Trustee O'Brien, you have the floor.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Superintendent Lofts. If I'm not mistaken, in the previous initiatives, there was a procurement officer mentioned. Do you, and I could be wrong, I thought that's what I saw. Do you not see the need for that anymore? Or maybe I misread it?
nope.
Go ahead.
That's actually part, Trustee O'Brien, it is actually still there, and I probably had it in my notes, and unfortunately I got it moved over. They're actually now, we've allocated that because we have the funding coming from the support for students. So that position has been allocated under the support for students, so it is being funded from ministry grants, as well as the .2 for the junior communications officer, as well as the .2 for the research.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary, Trustee O'Brien?
So just for clarification, we will not see that on the initiatives at all, right?
That is correct, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee O'Brien. Trustee Murphy, you have the floor. Trustee Murphy, you have the floor.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
This was in the working papers. It's not necessarily relevant to Superintendent Loft's presentation, but it's something that caught my eye. In the capital funding paper, they talk about modular construction pilot program, and I was wondering if Superintendent Merrick or Superintendent or Fred Thibault has any knowledge of that, and is that of any interest and relevance to our board?
Go ahead. Is he there? I think so. Yeah. Ryan, do you want to address that particular question for Trustee Murphy?
Yeah, I can jump in. So through you, Mr. Chair. We did have some conversations with the ministry about that. It seems to be more intended for northern boards, where getting materials in and out could be a challenge. So potentially doing modular construction where the building is built in a controlled facility and then brought to the site and assembled. That seems to be more of what they were thinking around that, to try and do some cost savings there, where remote builds are very expensive bringing the materials in. For us, where we have a high availability of trades in the area and availability of materials as well, and also due to the size of the schools, we build across the province, we build very large schools. I mean, we're typically in the 700, 650, 700 for elementary schools, and upwards of 1,400 for secondary schools. So that's what they were intending in that area, and I don't think it really applies to us or anybody in kind of an urban or suburban area. But we did ask that question. We met back with the ministry. I want to say it was back in September of 2019 when we met with them.
Since we have you,
have a supplementary there?
Yes, just since we have Superintendent Merrick, do we expect an additional call for capital funding like there was last year?
It's tough to predict, Trustee Murphy. In the past, we've seen them, almost 12 months to the date. It was kind of like clockwork.
So you're Superintendent Merrick, are you continuing with your answer?
I wouldn't. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, now I can.
Yeah, sorry. In recent rounds, it's been extended much further. So I wouldn't want to guess that it's going to be another call this year. And that's just my opinion. We have no indication of when the next call for capital projects will be.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You don't have any supplementary there, Trustee Murphy?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trustee Guzzo, you have the floor.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Just as part of, it was brought up through part of Superintendent Loft's presentation, and part of it was the expansion in the French immersion. I have to ask how that's going to roll out, given the scenarios that have been brought forward, whether it be 1, 2, and 3. Let's say that we do go back with smaller class sizes. Where does that put us in regards to expanding in portables? And it might not be a budget issue per se, but I think it actually is, because I think we might need to add more portables than if they stay in the existing sites than what is already there, given some of the enrollment numbers in some of the schools that we have where the expansion is happening.
That question was for Superintendent Merrick, I take it?
I'm not sure who answers it. I think it's a bit of a combination. All right.
What
are
so,
we looking at?
So let's put it out to Superintendent Merrick, and then if Superintendent Lofts can address anything remaining. Superintendent Merrick?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. It broke up a little bit for me there on the question, but I think it was around if we're adding more portables and not building bricks and mortar accommodations, how are we paying for those additional temporary accommodations? Trustee Guzzo, we do have a separate grant that comes out for temporary accommodations, which I'm not sure where that is in Superintendent Lofts' report, but he could probably point it out for you. But there's a separate funding and for French programs as well. So if we're adding portables at sites, there is a separate accommodation line that comes in for those portables. However, we do have to keep in mind that if we're creating empty spaces in some other schools elsewhere on the board, so if we're moving folks into portables and creating empty spaces elsewhere throughout the board, it could affect our business cases later on when we try and apply for new schools. If the ministry sees that we have open spaces in certain schools, they may make us fill those spaces before granting us any new capital funding for new buildings.
Thanks, Superintendent Merrick. That was well, it's not really supplementary. I think Superintendent Merrick missed part of and he said that he missed part of my question. My question was specifically about the expansion of French. And what it means given the three options that have been brought forward. If one of them is a combination, or if we're going back with smaller class sizes, how are those schools that are already having portables, and I'll use St. Mary's as an example, right, in Oakville. St. Mary's is already a portable school. It already has a huge enrollment. What does that do in the sense of, if we need to, let's say we end up going back to school with smaller class sizes, how do we facilitate adding that many more portables? Because that would be the case in regards to the expansion. So have we factored that in as an additional cost, or are we looking at that at all? Is there any talk about how that's going to roll out?
I think I can start answering that question, and then perhaps Director Daly can jump in as well. I think when
He was going to jump in
terms of adding extra classrooms to facilitate class sizes of 15 for September of 2020, the reality is we have about 1,500 classrooms across our board and about 250 portables, and we have about 40 empty rooms, surplus rooms throughout our board. So the reality of adding in another 1,700 rooms or so across the board by September is frankly is not a reality. And on top of that, the ability to add 1,700 teachers to teach in those 1,700 new rooms as well is also a challenge. So and frankly, it would be a challenge to staff at that level. So I don't think we're looking at any models that would double the number of classrooms, double the number of classroom teachers for September. And perhaps Director Daly can talk a little bit more about some of the other plans for September as well.
Director Daly, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. At this point, the only scenario where we'd be able to have students come back in classes of 15 would be one where students were not coming back to class every single day. So under that scenario, it would either be a day on, a day off, or a couple of days on, a couple of days off. Some other scenarios are a week on and week off, but we certainly don't have any funding stream to have all of our students back on a school site at classes of 15 and to be able to either house them or teach them.
Trustee Guzzo, now you can have your supplementary, I guess.
Thank you. I don't think I used the number 15. I thought it was an example. I wasn't saying that it was set in stone, but that actually answers a lot of questions for a lot of the parents that are out there who are wondering, and when we say normal, which means going back to potentially a 29 classroom. So, a lot's going to have to change within the next month and a half for that to happen, for us to go to scenario one.
But in regards specifically to the expansion of the program, do we see that there's going to be an increase in cost with the expansion of French? We're increasing a school that's already overflowing with a new program during this time. I'm just wondering if we've turned our mind to is there any impact to that?
So I can take that, Mr. Chair. Sorry, through the chair, there is funding available for new portables. When a school board adds a portable, we therefore apply for a grant, for a temporary accommodation grant, to provide funding for that portable. So we would get funding if we are adding portables through the expansion of the French program. We would get funding for additional portables. However, that could, since they are students coming from elsewhere within our board, that can create open classrooms elsewhere within our board, which then could jeopardize us getting capital priorities funding for new buildings in the future.
So can we look at, so I guess, and to add a whole bunch of other things to everything else that's going on, so can't we look at expanding that somewhere else where we have underutilized spaces then?
Who are we asking that question to? Superintendent Merrick or
Superintendent
Secretary
Merrick.
Daly? Yep. So go ahead, Superintendent Merrick.
And that's what we need to do, a boundary review or a program review to see where we can house those programs and kind of realign all of the French programs and those new expansion areas throughout our board. So I think that's what we have lined up for next year as well.
Okay. Vice Chair Dewart, you have the floor.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Going back one or two slides, can we go back to the slide where financial analyst and planning officer are put in as the requirement? Through you, Mr. Chair, question to Superintendent Loft. Are we experiencing any work stoppage right now in those two positions? What is the justification for adding them, and have you done an ROI for these two positions? So is there any work stoppage right now? What is the justification, and have you done any return on investment? What we can get out of it?
To you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead. Then.
There's definitely not a work stoppage, Trustee Dewart. In fact, it's the opposite. The work levels are extremely high in that department. There's a definite need. If you compare us to a typical board, we are definitely undersized in that area, especially given the amount of reporting that's required, not just internally, but externally as well. So currently we have 2 analysts in that department, period. One analyst reports to the manager of budget and capital. Another analyst reports to the manager of financial reporting and accounting. Those are our analysts. So that's our department right now.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary to that?
What about the planning officer position, Superintendent Loft?
Oh, okay, certainly. The planning department is just a requirement just to do growth. There's a lot of additional property needs in our system with a growth board. There's a large amount of work that's being done in that department. A lot of extended hours being put in that department that needs the requirement of another planning officer.
Mr. Chair, now
yes, supplementary. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So, have you looked at hiring staff which necessarily need not be an analyst, maybe 1 or 2 levels down there at a salary which is not really 100,000? Have you looked at that possibility, Superintendent Loft? In both the positions.
Thank you, Superintendent Loft. You have the floor. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, you must remember, everyone, that's not a $100,000 salary. That's a $100,000 salary and benefits. So the salary for those positions would not be $100,000, just to clarify that. All those positions include salaries and benefits. So the position would be for an analyst. So on the accounting side, we'd be looking for an accountant. That's the skill set that's required in a board of our size. We need to have a certified accountant in that role. And similarly in the planning side as well. Not obviously an accountant, but a planning officer, a person with planning capabilities. So we're looking at a salary between, I think the top end on an analyst is around the low 80s. That's the top end, so you wouldn't necessarily be starting out at that. These positions we put in here for are basically, I've allocated the top end that we would have, but that wouldn't really be our cost in year 1, 2, or 3.
Thank you. Is there a
Thank you.
supplementary to that?
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, Superintendent Loft.
Trustee Carabella, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Just curious what you just said. So in that whole column, the 24,000, the 33,000, those are all salary plus benefits for those positions.
Sorry, through Mr. Chair, if
Yes,
there's
go
a
ahead.
position, so if you look in the far right column, Trustee Carabella, it says FTE, full-time equivalent 1. So if you see a 1 there, then yes, that would include salary and benefits. The parts above, they're not positions, they're more PD, professional development or things. So there's no benefits in those. But if you see a 1, you're correct. We've included the salary and benefits in those positions.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And so my question is, when this comes back to us, when we're doing the budget as the draft and the final, I would ask that how will it be presented to us for voting on? I would ask that we vote on each separate enhancement.
Well, yes, we will bring that forward. I'd like to just remind the trustees that these are definitely a need in the system. So, but we will definitely bring it back. And I was thinking the presentation, how it is right here, right now, something similar to this.
Well,
if that works, or like you can read off each one individually. And
yes, I think that would be better. Thank you.
Does that work?
All right. Do you have a supplementary, Trustee Carabella?
Sorry, no, thank you. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
All right. So, Trustee DeRosa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. I have two questions. First of all, I guess one is about the upcoming budget session. I would like to ask Superintendent Loft that the expectation would be that we do a line-by-line review of the budget. Is that what the case? Is that what the understanding is? As well as, if that's the case, then that we get information ahead enough with sufficient time to be able to do at least some preparatory work in anticipation, so that we make that June the 22nd as productive as possible. So I think the expectation would be that we would be doing a line-by-line review, in which case some of these items would come back up for specific discussion. Is that the case, Superintendent Loft? Is that what we're to expect on June the 22nd?
Do you want to address that? So, Director Daly would like to weigh in on this. Go ahead.
I just want to ask a question for clarification through you, Mr. Chair, to Trustee DeRosa. I guess my question is, when you say line by line, what do you mean?
Well, what do I mean is the ability to go down the. I don't want to go down to the nitty gritty of it. We can start by looking at the financial statements totals, and we can start comparing them to budgets versus actuals year to date. We can start comparing them to last year's actuals, and then we can start asking questions on the variances accordingly. I'm not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that we start counting pencils and sheets of paper, but there are high level questions on a line by line basis that would be appropriate. So all I'm asking for is really a process to take place. I know that these exceptions or these program enhancements are being requested. I'm not putting them into question today. I just want the opportunity to be able to go through a line-by-line review of the budget being submitted versus the year-to-date results versus last year's performance, and to come to some form of judgment as to whether things are in line or whether they're not in line. So I'm just asking to see whether the June 22nd session will actually be in that vein. That's all.
So I'm sorry. So was that a question of Superintendent Lofts or Director?
Well,
Dale?
I started with Superintendent Loft, but I'm happy to get an answer from anybody who wants to weigh in.
So Superintendent Lofts, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that was not my intention. No, it was not to go through a line by line, because line by line means something different to everybody. It's difficult to come up with a process for what is your determination of nitty gritty could be different than someone else's determination of nitty gritty. We have 6,000 accounts.
Well, no, I don't want to analyze 6,000 accounts. That's
exactly
completely out of scope of what I'm trying to suggest here. But if we took the financial statement at its roll-up, right, I should be able to determine, let's take, I don't know, pick a line. It doesn't really matter. I should be able to take the total being budgeted or proposed budget for next year. I should be able to compare it to where we are on a year.
Trustee DeRosa? Trustee DeRosa?
Somehow I went muted again. I don't know where I left off.
So,
let me clarify. I don't intend to, my intention is not to go into 6,000 accounts. My intent is to take a look at it.
Trustee DeRosa, just bear with me. So can you give us an example, perhaps? If you give them an example, then I think we all would understand.
All right. Okay, just give me a second, okay? Let me pull up.
Do you want to come back? Do you want to come back to it, and we move on to Trustee O'Brien? Then you can come back when you have an example.
I can do that.
All right, so let's do that. So
I did have another point, though.
And you can deal with that then as well, and that way we can move along, and then you can get your example for us to share, or do you want to continue?
No, I'd like to continue, just because it's a completely unrelated point. And that's to the point that, to the question, or the line of questioning that Trustee Guzzo had about French and COVID and accommodations and what we're able to do and what we're not able to do. I would suggest to the group that this board accepted the fact and agreed to the fact and instructed to the staff that to implement early French. Now we've as a board, we made that decision. COVID has impacted programming all across the board. And I would suggest to you that it will impact, reasonably so, the decision to roll out extra French classes, but not the elimination of them. So I just want to raise the issue that COVID is not a justification for reverting back to or eliminating or a pretext for eliminating the directive on the rolling out of early French immersion. That's just a point I want to make. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So then you'll come back with your other thing. So Trustee O'Brien.
Yeah, I'm going to try to produce a practical example so that it doesn't.
All right. Very good.
So people can.
So we'll move on to Trustee O'Brien. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to Superintendent Lofts. Superintendent Lofts, am I not mistaken, the planning officer was not in the original enhancements. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so my question. So my
Go ahead.
What is
Excuse me. So Trustee O'Brien has the floor. Go ahead with your supplementary, Trustee O'Brien.
So, Superintendent, what has happened between then and now that makes you see a need for a planning officer where there wasn't one then?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the amount of work, the amount of time that my staff is spending over and above what a typical area would be spending time on. Requests coming through. It's a fluid document, Trustee O'Brien. There's more needs that are coming through. You're noticing it more and more. That's why it was placed in there. It was a need in the department.
All right, but you did not see that before?
I guess not.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee O'Brien. Trustee Guzzo, you have the floor.
Is Trustee DeRosa, is he ready to proceed so he can finish, or I can wait?
He hasn't indicated yet, so I would just say you go ahead, and then we can get back to Trustee Trustee DeRosa right after you.
Right. I just want to clarify because I feel like something was alluded to before I asked my question is, at no time did I imply that the French should not continue. My simple question was in regards to school sizing and with everything that is going on, how we're going to deal with it if there's any additional costs that would come out of that. In regards to my actual question, my question is, and if I missed it, I apologize. Superintendent Lofts, full day kindergarten equipment replenishment. Can you tell me what that's about?
Superintendent Lofts, go ahead.
Trustee Goose, we were noticing that we implemented, I'm trying to think, 2012 or 2013 or so was when we really went with FTK and putting the full day kindergarten in place. At that point in time, the ministry allocated about $5,000 to $10,000 per classroom to equip it with all the equipment, the unique equipment that's required in a full day kindergarten setting. That was a one-time funding mechanism. So now we're going on a number of years since that point in time, and there's really been a pressure on our full day kindergarten classrooms to update or get new equipment and such. So we noticed that last year, a few years now, so we thought we'd allocate at least a portion the budget for every classroom that we have that allows the school the opportunity to replenish their equipment, for lack of a better term, to start moving it forward, because really we had that one initial setup and really we really haven't, with the exception of what a normal budget in a school has, we haven't allocated any additional funds to it. So that's where that's coming from.
Is there a supplementary, Trustee Guzzo?
Yeah, just okay. So this is specifically for equipments to replenish, but isn't that already part of each school's budget? Like, would they not already be able? Kind of like their wish list, right? It's part of their school planning budget. No.
Through Mr. Chair, you're correct. There is that, but the one thing with the FTK classrooms is they're more costly than your typical classroom. I guess what's the word I'm looking for? The equipment that they require, or all their, I guess, what do they call when they use the manipulatives and such, are quite different than a typical grade 1, 2, 3, or 4 classroom. So we recognize that there is additional expenditures on those areas and those classrooms that really are atypical to a typical school setting.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Agnew, you have the floor now.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I would just suggest, further to what Trustee DeRosa was commenting on, and perhaps when he gets back to us with an example of what he's saying, but if the will of my fellow trustees is to dive into this budget and review this line by line, I do think that is getting into the minutia. But again, if that's the will of the rest of the board, I would suggest then that we need more than one meeting. You know, this document that we were given in excess of 300 pages with a couple of days' notice, you know, and if we are looking at going something line by line with the number of line items and the amount of discussion that I anticipate will happen if we do a line-by-line review, that's not something that I think is feasible or responsible to complete in one meeting. So I would suggest, if that is the route that people want to take, that we take a look at having additional meetings so that we can make sure that we're doing this comprehensively.
Thank you, Trustee Agnew. Somebody want to address that? You want to address that, Superintendent Lofts? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, through Mr. Chair. Now, that is the will of the board. We also need more time than what we've currently allocated.
Very good. Do you have a supplementary, Trustee Agnew?
I don't, but if we are going to do that, my suggestion would be that we decide on that ASAP. I think we need to decide on the format with which this is going to take as far as a review. I also heard Trustee Carabella commenting about having these program enhancements broken down so that we could, you know, vote on each one separately. I do think we need to determine the route that we want to take when we review this and have that clearly established. So that we know how much prep work we need to do in advance, to what extent, and then I think we need to decide ASAP if we are going to be adding that additional meeting in.
So, how about we finish with our questions? We'll deal with Trustee DeRosa, and then at the end we can maybe establish whether or not we will need an extra meeting to go through the budget as has been suggested. Trustee Carabella, you have the floor now.
Thank you. I have just two questions. So Mr. Lofts, you said that the financial analyst position was required. And what do you mean by required? Is it required by whom? Or the ministry? Or what does that refer to?
So, yeah, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Lofts. Go ahead.
What I mean by required, I mean it's required, sorry, through Mr. Chair. What I mean is required in a department. The number of hours that are being put in by my team, the amount of expectations being placed on the finance department requires another position.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I wasn't quite sure. And
Your
then,
second question? Yeah,
thank
go
you.
ahead.
My second question, just regarding the French, since it was brought up, and Director Daly mentioned at our May 19th meeting that he would come back with some more details about going forward for this September and next September, what that would look like. So I think it's clear that we would need to have that at some point, Director Daly. If you have that in your plans soon, can you let us know? Thank you.
Go ahead. Do you want to address that? No?
I can, and through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the question, Trustee Carabella. Certainly for September, I mean, our registrations are done, our classes are set up, we're ready to go. Those classes have been allocated. You will recall the plan all along had been to revisit expansion in the fall, to take a look at particular pressure points, probably in Milton being one with the greatest growth there, and that will require us to do some boundary review work. And that still is the plan going forward, obviously subject somewhat to what we come back to in September.
Thank you. Is that sufficient, Trustee Carabella?
Thank you. Okay.
Yes. So Trustee DeRosa, I'm coming back to you to provide us with your example. Trustee DeRosa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me be absolutely clear. My intent by a line-by-line review, line-by-line may mean different things to different people, but what it means to me is essentially the ability to go through the major lines of the financial statements, identify the variances, compare them to the plan, and then having the ability to ask questions about it. So my intent is purely at the consolidated financial statements, revenues and expenses, line by line. Okay. So
are you suggesting perhaps, excuse me, Trustee DeRosa, are you suggesting perhaps that if we had a category like teachers' expenses, then you would want to know why the difference and how many, how many people does that translate to an extra?
Yes, I would actually qualify that even a little more, that if there was if that line, for instance, showed no variance to previous years, then I'd have very little questions to ask about it. But if it shows a variance of going up, an increase in expenses, I don't know, 50, 60, 70, pick a number. If it showed a major material variance, I'd want to be able to ask questions about it. So I'm not even.
So when you're talking about line by line, you're talking about line by line as per category or line by line for each expense item?
Well, I think we may be dealing with semantics. So let me just give you an example, okay? So if I go to the financial statements for the first line on the revenue line is legislative grants, right? I've got the numbers in the front of me. The budget last year was 295 million. The actual was actually 292 million. So we actually received $3 million less than what we anticipated. That $3 million variance might warrant in the heads of some trustees to ask some questions. So that's really what I mean is legislative grants is a big line. If the variance justifies the increase or the decrease justifies asking some questions, I'd like the ability, or at least I'd like to offer the trustees, my fellow trustees, the ability to ask questions about it. If that variance, for instance, was completely on budget, I wouldn't have much to say about it because it was on plan. So my starting point would be to look into the operating revenues and the line by line.
Trustee DeRosa, just bear with me here. So Superintendent Lofts has an example. Can he just show you and see if this is exactly what it is that you're looking for or something similar?
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, so go ahead. So did you want to blow that up? Can you blow that up? Go ahead, Superintendent Lofts.
It's small, but thank you through Mr. Chair. Trustee DeRosa, this is what we provide on a quarterly basis to the, now this is more looking at the expenses here, but we'd also do something similar for the budget as well. So we do include that as part of our budget. The information is there and is definitely open for questions. Is this kind of what you're looking at, which is something we already do provide?
I'm not suggesting that you don't provide the information. It's just presented in a way that might require a little bit of improvement in order for us to ask some questions. That's all. The information is there. It's just a matter in which you or it is presented. So, for instance, let me give you an example. If you look at classroom instructions, you'll take your first line, right? Your first line says 2019-2020 original budget estimates.
Or muted again, so you're going to have to replay what you said.
Darn it. I think there's probably a voice sensor on my computer that keeps shutting me off. So I'll try to lower my voice a little bit, even though it's unnatural for me. I'm not yelling. Please understand that. It's just the tone of my voice. So what I'm trying to represent, Superintendent Loft, for instance, the number, the original budget estimate of $226 million was the first kick at the can, if you will, at the budget. Then we turned around and revised it to $224 million. And then ultimately the revised forecast budget in May was $224,236. We never changed the number. Frankly, the 226 is completely irrelevant in terms of trying to assess our financial performance, right? What is more relevant is to try to take a look at the May forecast, right? May forecast implies that there's, 9 months worth of operation, right? And a few months left in order to determine the actuals. So what we're saying is that we're anticipating in May to meet the budget, to meet the revised budget of 224 million. We know very well that when those actuals come in at the end of August, that the actual forecast is going to be different. The actuals are going to be different. So what I'm suggesting is that let's do comparison with actual numbers to budgets, and let's gauge based on that experience what the numbers are going to be moving forward. So, and if I move forward on the 163, for instance, we like to compare that in May we're at 72% of the total budget. Well, we really don't know whether at the end of the year we're actually going to meet that or not. In fact, I will suggest to you that in 2018-2019, when we finally got the actuals, and I'm sorry you don't have these numbers in front of you, but they're the same numbers we were provided with at some point in time. I'll give you, if you'll indulge me and believe me, take me at my word for the moment that the numbers are correct, okay? The legislative grants for 2018-2019 were budgeted for $295 million. They actually came in, when we actually got and closed the books, they actually came in at $292 million. So that means we were short by $3 million. It's reasonable for us to
so the reason you have the revised budget is to pick up the differences that occur from your June budget estimates to the ones that we pick up in December, and that picks up the differences. So that's an ever-changing number. That number can never be consistent. You can only look at it at the tail end of the year to see whether or not you've met, your budgeted amount. You're not speaking, Trustee DeRosa.
Mr. Chair, I would like to go back to the very basic question of what does line by line mean? Essentially, what I'd like to be able to do is to do an evaluation, have a session to identify the major variances in the budget or in the plan on a line by line basis based on what our financial statements are right now. I don't want to dig into how much money we spent for pencils. That is far from what my objective is. What I would like to do is to basically go take a look at our financial statements as they are consolidated and reported by our auditors, and do an analysis.
We get the idea.
Okay.
I'll have to move.
That's all I want to do.
All right.
I don't
very
want
good.
to make
Thank you.
work for anybody.
Thank you. Trustee O'Brien, you have the floor.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. I just need 2 points of clarification for Superintendent Loss. First, on the July 22nd session, the trustees are going to be there, correct?
Most definitely, yes.
Yes.
Okay. And the second one was regarding the multicultural consultant. So after this budget session, after this budget is estimate is passed, we will have the same number as we do now, correct?
Correct, yes. It's not a new position, sorry, through Mr. Chair. It's not a new position, Trustee O'Brien, it's just a change in funding source.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee O'Brien. Trustee Murphy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Superintendent Lofts. So what I'm getting from some of the questions being asked here, that there's almost a perception that you get a big bucket of money and you can decide where you spend that money. Where the reality is, most of the funds that come in are prescribed to specific areas, of which is probably what, 88% of the money we receive has to go to specific areas where it's spent, and really there's no discretion whatsoever. So of that 12%, and hey, 12% of 430 million or 450 million is a lot of money, I get it. So really our efforts more or less should be looking at the discretionary areas, and by calling them discretionary just means that you have some choice. It doesn't mean that they're nice to haves. They're still essential and they're still warranted, and you need those positions. It's just that we can make decisions based on that. So I would like to clarify that. So when you're adding the full-time positions that you require in accounting or purchasing or wherever the case may be, those are not funds that are coming out of the classroom. Is that correct?
That's correct. Go ahead, Superintendent Lofts.
Sure. That is 100% correct, yes. Those will be part of our board administration and governance grant. Okay. So they do not come out of the classroom.
And of those areas where we talk and we see large discrepancies, most of those could be answered by our average daily attendance or those types of large macro numbers that really drive our funding. Is that correct also?
Sorry, through Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
On the revenue side, we've talked kind of about the revenue side already. On the expense side, a lot of these variances, they have lots of different, we have almost over 3,000 employees at our board. So if somebody goes off on a leave, or so when someone goes off on a leave, for example, what we're paying as a board is we're paying the person on leave as well as the person coming in on a supply day. So those kind of expenditures are dishes where basically for that one position, it's costing us as a board, there's 2 salaries relating to that one position. And also that one position could generate actually 3 salaries if unfortunately something happens to the person that came in to look over that classroom gets ill, and then we have to replace that teacher. So those kind of items come up as well. It also can impact our funding in our expense side of things. So when you multiply that by 3,000 or so, it can change. It can get quite tedious to find the exact reason why we could be out by.
You have a supplementary, Trustee Murphy?
Well, just observation is that we're a growth board, and that's fundamental. And people have to understand that as businesses grow, I live this every day. The cost to administer that business increases, and you need more bodies. So, for example, all of the demands that we're asking on Superintendent Lofts, they all take time to generate. Yes, it's vital for us to know that information, but as his role expands, you need bodies to do that work. That's the reality of it. And with all due respect to my fellow trustees, we really don't have the insight on a daily basis to question whether he needs another full-time employee or not. It's our responsibility to ask why, and then we really need to take his answer at face value, unless we go spend a few days in his department and try and make that determination for ourselves. So that's just something I think we need to keep in mind when we're looking at these. We are a growth board. Our revenue has gone up. We do need to add full-time personnel. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Murphy. Trustee Agnew, you now have the floor. Trustee Agnew?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
you have
it's
the
in
floor.
cottage country and it's...
Yeah, there's a delay.
So, can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Trustee Murphy needs to get out of my head, because I just was going to bring up the same points. So two pieces is one, thank you, Trustee Murphy, for acknowledging that part of probably why Superintendent Lofts is looking for the additional support is that we have asked for a number of reports, again, information that the board feels that they need, but it is putting extra time and effort. The school generated funds reports can be 40 to 60 hours, and so that's just one example of the workload that's being put on his department, and then other departments as well. And so just to reiterate that, we are asking for things. There's only we only have a certain amount of resource available at our board, and we are a growth board. And I like the idea of taking a look at some of those discretionary areas where perhaps our input and our insight may or may not be able to further dictate some of that spend, but for some of those areas that money is spoken for. And I think we need to have faith in our staff to make the decisions that they feel they need to make when they are adding positions to keep up with the demand that they have to meet the needs of our staff and students. So not a question, but just to reiterate my opinion, and thank you, Trustee Murphy, for also mentioning those points.
Thank you, Trustee Agnew. So Trustee DeRosa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Look, I'd like to make just two very simple points. What is within the discretion, it's often been argued that out of the budget we only control 15. Really, we can directly influence 15% or 20%, whatever the case might be. In terms of dollars, that's could be anywhere between $17 and $20 million, and it is certainly not an insignificant amount. So we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to exercise due diligence over that, to be able to request oversight, to apply oversight. We have a legal responsibility to do that, and we have a responsibility to ask and receive information that allows and facilitates for us to carry out our role. This has nothing to do with discretion, giving discretion to the staff to run the daily operations. It has everything to do with accountability and reporting, and nothing else. Thank you.
So you're going to end this. So that's the last question on this particular item. Go ahead, Trustee Guzzo.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. And I too would just like to reiterate, we keep adding work in different places. And yes, we're entitled to ask for different things, but the more we ask for that is not part of our norm, our staffing levels are based on what is considered the normal level of work. And there have been a couple of motions on the table most recently
excuse me, that require more. And once again, tonight, we're asking for more to be done in
Mr. Chair,
regards to.
point of order, Mr. Chair.
No, sorry.
Oh, so hang on, she
Mr.
has
Chair, I
the
have a
floor,
point of
so
order, and it's my right to raise a point of order, Mr. Chair. If I may.
your point of, so if you're raising a point of order, please.
Point of order.
Excuse me. So if you have a point of order, I want the bylaw you're using it and how you're applying it to your point of order. Otherwise, I cannot entertain it.
I'll call it something else, but I'll give I'll put my hands up and get an opportunity to weigh in on.
I've already, so
Yeah.
Trustee Guzzo has the floor. So Trustee Guzzo, can you please finish?
Yes, I was just going to say that thank you, Mr. Chair. Just that the fact is we are once again now changing what has historically been the process that, whether right, wrong, or indifferent, has been done by our board. So we have to take that into consideration. And then it's not just been with finance. There's been other things that we have asked of staff that isn't necessarily part of the norm. And there has to come a point in time where we have to be able to rely on staff for them to say, look, we can't keep doing this. And I'm sure they will have the rationale should we have questions to ask in regards to it. But in regards to being interrupted without a point of order, I would like to actually make a point of order, Mr. Chair, is that if I continue to be interrupted for things that aren't points of order, they're actually restricting my right to speak freely, just like he was trying to.
Yeah, point of privilege, Trustee Guzzo. So you can use your point of privilege if another trustee is impeding your ability to express your thoughts or to voice your opinions. Then you have the right to ask me to intervene.
Thank you. And you know what, Mr. Chair, I would ask because this happens on a regular basis and I think it needs to stop.
All right. So your point's well taken. It will stop. So we will now move on. There will be no more questions on this particular item. So I do need to go. We need to go back in camera. So I need a motion to move back in camera.
I'll make the motion.
Moved by Trustee Guzzo.
And I will second it.
Seconded by Trustee O'Brien. Trustee DeRosa?
Yes,
In favor? To move back in camera.
in favor.
Thank you. Trustee O'Brien?
In favor.
Trustee Carabella?
In favor.
Trustee Duart?
In favor.
Trustee Guzzo?
In favor.
Trustee Agnew?
In favor.
Trustee Murphy?
In favor.
Trustee Intomasi is in favor. Student Trustee Caratao?
In favor.
Trustee Swan?
In favor.
Trustee Bambra?
In favor.
All right, so we're back in camera. No, sorry.
We're going to come out of this meeting and go back into.
Oh, that's right. So we have to come out of this meeting and then go back into the other meeting. So bear with me. Yeah, so student trustees, you're unable to come back into in camera. So I would ask you to just log off. Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem.